How to call native Android code from your Flutter app, whereas we will look at both calling Kotlin or Java platform-specific code. And secondly, we will pass and also stream data from the native Android app back to the Flutter app. Let's start by making platform-specific calls. If we click here on this button, then we want to make use of native Android APIs to get the battery level of our phone. Therefore, we create in our state a new message channel with which we can send messages between Flutter and the native Android side over the platform channel. Inside of the message channel, you need to define the message channel name, which needs to be unique, and therefore it is common to put here in front a prefix, in this case the package name. Alternatively, you can also put your unique domain here inside as a prefix, followed by the feature that you want to request from the Android native side. And lastly, you only need to make use of this message channel. Therefore, we go here back to our button, and if we press on it, then we want to call a method getBatteryLevel. And inside of it, we make use of the message channel to invoke a method. So here you can specify the Android method that you like to call. And this native Android method that we call can also return something, so in this case the battery level that we simply want to put inside of our state. So here at the top I have created another field, waiting, which is here displayed in our text field that we have created here below. If you now click here on this button, then you will get here an exception, which is called no implementation found for the method getBatteryLevel. And this is because we haven't implemented the Android side yet to get the battery level. To implement the Android native code, you simply go to the Android folder within your Flutter project, right-click on it and click on Open in Android Studio. In Android Studio, you simply open here this app folder Java, and within the com folder you find the main activity. By default, Flutter uses Kotlin code on the Android native side. Later, I will also show you how you can adapt this Kotlin code that we write to Java code. Alright, let's start by making first of all some imports that we want to use later. And now the Android host needs also to listen to this message channel that we have created already on the Flutter side. So here we also create then inside of this configure Flutter engine method a message channel. And here it is really important that you use here as a second argument then the same name that you have also used on the Flutter side. So make sure that this channel name is here exactly the same as the channel name that we have defined on the Flutter side. And now we can call on this message channel the method setMethodCallHandler. And with this, we can then listen to the method that we have invoked on the Flutter side. It's called getBatteryLevel. Therefore, it is important that the name is also matching with the name that we have invoked on the Flutter side. If you like, you can also pass some data from Flutter to Android by defining some arguments. And Flutter converts all basic Dart data types automatically to the native Android specific data types and vice versa. Inside the official Flutter documentation, you also find here a list where you see the conversion of all the Dart types to the Kotlin types or to the Java types. In our case, we want to send here a normal map, which is then basically a hash map on Kotlin or on Java. So all in all, this map that we want to pass to the Android native side has as a key the name and as a value then the real name. Back on the Android side, you can then get the arguments and you access then the same key that you have sent, in our case the name. Also make sure that you define here the data type that you have received from the Flutter side. And finally, you can use the result to send some data back to the Flutter side, in our case the battery level. And therefore you can call here any native Android APIs to get the battery level that we want to send then to Flutter. So here is the implementation of how to get the battery level on Android. Let's also try everything out. So I have restarted my Flutter app and then I click here on this button and you see we get then the battery percentage back from the Android native side. Instead of an integer, let's also change the data type that we sent back from Android to Flutter, so in this case a string. On the Android side, you can then return instead of this integer a string, so we put here the name, the argument that we have received from Flutter inside of the result that we sent back to Flutter. Let's also try this one out. After you have restarted your Flutter app, you get then a string back with the name that we have passed before to the Android side. And at the end, I also want to show you the Android Java code implementation. First of all, we have here all the different importment statements. And like before, we also create this configure Flutter engine method. We create then here our message channel. As before, we set on this message channel the method call handler. Again, like before, we listen then for the method get battery level, get the arguments, get also the native API with the battery level. So this is the method that gets the battery level or whatever you like to execute. And finally, we send then the result back to the Flutter side. The Flutter code can stay exactly the same as before with Kotlin. Let's also try it out. If I click on this button, you see we get then the result back from our Android Java code implementation. And finally, it is important to notice that in most cases, you don't need to write platform-specific code yourself in Flutter. So in this case, of course, there is already a battery package created by the Flutter community, who has also created thousands of other plugins that you can easily use to access native functionality with your Flutter app. And by the way, if you liked this video, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. How to call Flutter code from the native Android code to pass messages and also stream data from both Kotlin and Java back to the Flutter app. To listen in Flutter for data from the native Android side, therefore we need to create a message channel, and you can give it here any message channel name. And lastly, we only need to make use of this message channel to listen for data. Therefore, we go inside of the init state. And here we create then a method on listen battery. Inside of it, we use then the message channel to set here our method call handler up. And with this, we can then receive method calls from the native Android side. So they can call a method, for example, report battery level. And secondly, we can then access also the data that was passed through the arguments from the native Android side. So in our case, we want to listen for the battery level of our phone. And after we have received the battery level from the Android native side, then we also want to store it inside of our state. And with this, we update here the text that is then displayed inside of this text widget. Next, we want to do the implementation for the Android native side. Therefore, you right-click on the Android folder within your Flutter project, and here you click on Open in Android Studio. Inside of Android Studio, we go inside of the app Java folder, and here within this com folder, you find the main activity. By default, Flutter uses Kotlin code for the Android native side. However, I will also later explain how we can do everything with Java. First of all, I want to get started by defining all the imports. Secondly, we need to set up our message channel inside of this class. Therefore, we override the configure Flutter engine method, and inside of it, we want to set up then our message channel that we have set up before on the Flutter side. And here, as the second parameter of this message channel, you need to define the message channel name. And it is important that this message channel name is the same as the message channel name on the Flutter side. So back in Flutter, make sure that your message channel has exactly the same name that you also use here on the Android side. And lastly, we want to use the message channel to send some data back to the Flutter side. This is what we do inside of the onCreate. However, you can also do it wherever you like. And here we use the message channel to call a method from the Flutter app. And secondly, you can also pass some arguments to the Flutter side. So in our case, we want to get the battery level from the native Android API. Therefore, I create here a new method getBatteryLevel, which is calling some native code. And this is what we want to send then back to the Flutter side. It is important to notice if you call here this code inside of the onCreate method, then this is not working. You also need to wrap here around then this handler. And here you can set after how many milliseconds you want to send the data to Flutter, and you can set it even to 0. This will then immediately send the data to Flutter. Let's also try it out. So stop your Flutter application and start it again. And then you will see that you immediately get the percentage from the Android native side. So all in all, we have now received here through this call arguments the battery level, and we simply display it here in our UI. And finally, we want to stream some data from the Android native site back to the Flutter side. And therefore you simply create an event channel. So we create here another channel name. And secondly, we create then here an event channel and also initialize it inside of this configure Flutter engine method. As before, the second argument is then here the channel name, which we have defined here at the top. So all in all, with the event channel, you can send only a stream of messages into one direction from the native Android side to the Flutter side. And to do this, you can simply call on your event channel the method setStreamHandler, and we want to implement it here inside of a separate myStreamHandler class. Therefore, we go here simply down and we create this new myStreamHandler class. And if you do so, then you also need to override the onListen and onCancel method. Next, you can create a broadcast receiver to get your data. So we initialize a new receiver inside of a new method. And inside of this broadcast receiver on receive method, you can then put the functionality inside what you want to receive. In our case, we use the Android native code to access here if our battery is currently charging, if it is already full, or if it is discharging. And then we simply send here some data back to the Flutter side. And lastly, to make this work, you also need to register your broadcast receiver that you have stored inside of this field. Therefore, we call here the method register receiver and put our receiver inside. And here we listen then on the action battery changed. And finally, we also implement the onCancel method, whereas we simply unregister our receiver again. So all in all, on the Android native side, we have set up an event channel. And on this event channel, we are calling then the setStreamHandler to create a stream handler. And inside of the stream handler, we are sending then basically some events back to the Flutter side. Back on the Flutter side, we want to create also an event channel, and this event channel has to have the same name that we also have defined for our event channel here on the Android side. And lastly, we only need to use this channel to listen then to the stream that we have created on the Android native side. Therefore, here inside, we use our event channel to call the receive broadcast stream method. And with this, we can then listen here to the events that we have received from the Android side. To make everything clean, we also want to save then this inside of a stream subscription inside of our state. And lastly, if we don't use the subscription anymore, then we also want to clean it up inside of the dispose method. Alright, and we also want to use the events that we get from the native Android side, and we simply want to put it then inside of another field inside of our state. And this is basically the text that is here displayed inside of the right side in our phone. So I have created here another text field with this charging level field. Let's also try it out. After you stop and restart your Flutter application, then you should always see the changes of your battery, if it is currently charging, if it is discharging, or if it is simply full. So all in all, we have used the event channel to stream some data from the native side to Flutter, and therefore we are listening here always to the events from the Android native side, and every time if we get here some changes, then we display it inside of our UI. Let's also look at the same implementation with Java code on the Android native side. First of all, we start here with all the importment statements. Secondly, we define the method and event channel at the top. The same as before within the configure Flutter engine method, we create then our method channel and our event channel. And on the event channel, we also create this stream handler with the myStreamHandler class. Next, we use then the method channel inside of the onCreate method to get here basically the battery level and to invoke then a method on the Flutter side and also send some data to the Flutter side. And finally, we only have the getBatteryLevel method, which is the Java code implementation. And finally, we create also this myStreamHandler class. And the same as before, we create an onListen and onCancel method. We initialize here our receiver with the action battery changed. Let's also look at the initReceiver method. Here it is basically the same. So always we get the status of the current battery. and then we basically send here the data back to the Flutter side. How to call native iOS Swift code from your Flutter app. Let's start by making platform-specific calls. If we click here on this button, then we want to make use of native iOS APIs to get the battery level of our phone. Therefore, we create in our state a new message channel with which we can then send messages between Flutter and the native iOS side over a platform channel. Inside of it, you need to define a unique message channel name, and therefore you usually put here in front your package name inside. Alternatively, you can make use of your unique domain as a prefix, followed by the feature that you want to request from the iOS native side. And lastly, we only need to implement this message channel. Therefore, we go here back to our button, and if we press on it, then we call a new method getBatteryLevel. And here inside, we use then the message channel to invoke a method. So you specify here the iOS native method that you like to call. Also, the native iOS method can return something that we want to save then inside of our state. So therefore, we create a new field inside of our state battery level that is also displayed here within our text widget that is displayed here on the right side. Let's also try it out. So if I click here on this button, then you will see that we get here this missing plugin exception, no implementation found error, because we have not yet implemented this method getBatteryLevel that we are trying to call here. To implement the iOS native site, you go to your iOS folder, right click on it, and then choose Open in Xcode. And this is only possible inside of a macOS system. Inside of Xcode, you need to go to the runner section, and here you have this app delegate Swift file that you need to open. And here inside of this file, the iOS host needs to listen first of all to this message channel that we have created before on the Flutter side. To create this message channel, you also need to create before this Flutter view controller. And now it is important that you define inside of the message channel the same message channel name that we have also defined on the Flutter side. So make sure that this name is matching exactly with this name that we have defined on the Flutter side for our message channel. And finally, we can use the message channel to listen then to the method that we have invoked before on the Flutter side. So before we have invoked the getBatteryLevel that we are now listening to. So make sure that this name is exactly matching with the name that we have invoked before on the Flutter side. If you like, you can also send some arguments from Flutter to the iOS native side. So in this case, we want to set here a map with the key, name, and the value Sarah apps. Back on the iOS side, you can receive the arguments, and here it is important that you use here the same key that you have also used on the Flutter side. Here it is then also important that you define the type that was sent from Flutter to the iOS side. So in this case, a map of string. And finally, we want to send some data back, in our case, the battery level. Therefore, we create a new method receiveBatteryLevel that we create here then below. So here is the implementation of how to get the battery level on iOS. However, you can also call here then any other native iOS APIs. So inside of this method, we are basically returning then an integer, and then we can basically use this integer that was returned and send it back to the Flutter side by putting this value inside of this result method. Alright, let's also try it out. After you have stopped and restarted here your application, you can then click on this button, and with this you see we get the battery level of our iOS device. If you like, you can also change the data type that you receive from the iOS side. Let's also go to the iOS side, and instead of sending here back an integer, we want to send then a string, whereas we put then the name that we have received before from the Flutter side inside of the string that we sent back, and after we put then the battery level inside. Let's also try it out. So if I click here on this button, we get a string back, and also the name that we have passed before from Flutter to the iOS native site is included because the iOS site has sent this name back to us. How to generate and call Android native code by using the Pigeon package, which is a native code generator tool that makes communication between Flutter and the Android native host platform highly convenient and type safe. Let's use the Pigeon package to automatically generate native code by going to the pub/spec YAML file and add the Pigeon package to your dev dependencies. Next, we create within our Flutter project a new folder which is called Pigeons. And secondly, inside of this folder, we create a new file which is called book.dart. Inside this book.dart file, you can put all the objects inside that you want to send to the native site or vice versa. And secondly, we create another class with all the methods that we want to call on the Android native site. Here it is important that you also have an abstract class because we only define here the methods. And secondly, we also need to annotate this abstract class with the host API annotation. And to make use of it, you also need to import here this Pigeon package. So if you want to call methods from the Android native site with Flutter, then you use the host API annotation. You also have the Flutter API annotation, and here the communication is in the other direction. Alright, in this case we use the host API annotation because we want to call some methods on the Android native site from Flutter. Before we use here this Dart file to generate our Android native code, I also want to explain shortly here all the rules about this file. So first of all, you need to create this book.dart file outside of your lib folder, so we have created here inside of a separate folder. Secondly, this file that we have created outside of the lib folder should only contain classes and not other functions or other declarations. Another rule is that if you use your methods, then you need to have here a return type, so you cannot write something like this. This is not working. At least you have to write here in front void if you have no return type. Otherwise, you need to put here the return type inside. Alright, and lastly, we want to create within our root Flutter folder a new file which is called generate shell. Next, you can go to the Pigeon package on pub.dev and we go here to the usage section, and here you have a link for the example. And within this link, you can scroll a bit down and here you see then a comment, and this is a comment which we basically want to copy and paste it here inside. Next, we want to modify this comment by going to the second line, and here we define then the input file which we have placed in our Pigeons folder. However, in our case it is called book.dart. In the third line you see where this file will be later generated, so we will generate in our lib folder a Pigeon.dart file. And lastly, we want to modify here the last two lines. Here we have a long path within our Android app folder. So let's go to our Android app source main folder, and here you have this Java folder, and inside of it you have this generated plugin file, and we want to copy here the relative path. The next step is that we simply replace here the path with this new path, so I simply put it here inside, and I also remove here the end, which is in this case a file because we only want to keep here the folder, and instead we have here at the end another file which is called Pigeon Java. We also need to change here the Java package name, therefore you simply go here to this Java folder in your path, and everything behind it you want to simply copy besides the file name, and then I simply put it here inside, and instead of the slashes you want to put every time a dot inside. And lastly, I want to copy here this comment, or you can also run this file directly. However, you can always go here inside of your terminal, and inside of it you paste then this command inside. And after some time the generation should be successful in case you have here no error messages. So all in all, based on this Pigeon template file, we have generated automatically this Pigeon.dart file within our lib folder, and here we have all the code which is needed for communicating then with the native Android side. And secondly, within your Android folder, this Pigeon Java file was automatically generated for you, and this handles here then the communication on the Android native side, which we are calling from Flutter. And lastly, if we click here on this button on the right side, then we want to use the generated native code to communicate with the Android native site. Therefore, we create first of all a list of books. And now if we press on this button, then we want to fetch this book. Here inside, we call then the book API and search method that we have defined before inside of our Pigeon file. So here, this is our template file. And now we use here the book API and the search method, which we then communicate with the native site. And as a result, we get then a list of books back. Let's go back to the main file, and here we want to implement a number, whereas we take the number from the length of our books, which we have here in our state. And lastly, we get then from the search some books back. And as you notice, this has here a nullable type, which we also want to convert to a non-nullable type. And finally, we can put the new books inside of our state. So we put it simply here to the list of all of our books. The last step is to create this search method inside of the Android native site. Therefore, let's go here to the Android folder and let's open it up in Android Studio. Inside of Android Studio, you can open the app folder, and here within the Java COM folder, you find the main activity file. So by default for Flutter projects, you have here Swift code on the Android native site. However, I will also show you later the Java implementation. First of all, let's start by making some importments, and secondly, we want to override here the configure Flutter engine method. And inside of this method, you need to call the setup method on this book API that we have created initially. So like you remember, inside of our Pigeon template file, we have created before this book API class, and here the search method that we now want to implement inside of the native site. Therefore, we create here a new class, my book API at the top, and inside of this one, you need to implement then exactly this search method. And inside of the search method, you can call any native Android APIs to actually get here, for example, some books and return them. In our case, we randomly generate some books, so we give it a random title, and also we give it here a random image, and then we return this book back to the Flutter site. And finally, let's go back to the Flutter site, and the books that we receive here from the Android native site are going inside of this books list. And lastly, we also want to display then this list of books. Therefore, I change here the implementation of our scaffold body property, whereas I create here a page view builder, and here we get basically all the books. And I simply display then in a column the image, so we display the URL image of the book and also the generated title that we have randomly generated on the Android native site. Let's also try it out. Therefore, make sure that you restart here your Flutter application, and then you can click on this button, and he will then fetch here the book with the image and also the random title. And if I click again on this button, he will fetch another book, which we see here then in our page view. Let's also look at the Java code implementation for the Android native site. First of all, here we have the importment statements. Secondly, we implement the configure Flutter engine method where we set up our API, in this case the book API. And lastly, we create this my API class here at the top, which implements then the search method. And inside of it, you call then the native Java code APIs for getting here, for example, a random book in this case, or whatever you like to implement.